thing I want to talk about, and again, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because it's literally not possible even to cover this in detail, even in one day. Like the concept of what is an object is kind of the title of this first little part of what I want to finish with. So what is an object in object-oriented programming?
It's like the toaster and the toast.
The toaster and the toast. So you want to take a stab at if that were a test question, it's like the toaster and the toast is closer than most people would ever get. Does anybody want to take a stab at what is an object in object-oriented programming? Can anybody try? No. Okay, no problem. That's good. So if I said...
An instance of a class.
Exactly right, which is why I'm asking, right? So if I said car in my programming, whatever, it won't let me type car. It's trying to do autocorrect for me. How about auto? And I said Buick, Chevy, VW. I'll ask the same question again. In this context, what's an object? Looking at what I just typed. Anybody want to take a stab when I say, tell me what an object is? Cars? Any other guesses?
Car company.
Car company? Any other guesses? Okay. And I'm doing this very kind of amateur style on purpose, or kind of elementary on purpose, because you'll hear me talk about code isn't the hard part, because it's not, once you understand some basic things.
So is it
you already understand JSON, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. So in this example, an auto is a class. A car is an object. A Buick, a Chevy, or a VW is an object. There's a big difference. So autos have a bunch of common things in a bunch of features and functions and things about cars that are shared across all the cars you'll ever see, or most cars you'll ever see. So what's something about a car that's shared?
Four wheels.
The fact that it has wheels.
Yeah.
Do they all have four?
Some are three.
Okay, so I would just say wheels.
If you live in Peterborough.
Right?
Then
So my car might have four wheels, your car might have three. But wheels, what else is shared about a car?
Steering wheel?
Steering wheel, engine,
The fact they're vehicles?
they're vehicles,
they
okay.
move you.
Aha, that's what I was looking for. Three of us said things that they kind of have.
Properties?
Wheels, properties is exactly right. Wheels and steering wheels and engines. And Thomas threw out something that they do. Big difference. But it's still true. Some cars have stuff and cars do stuff. That is the essence of what object-oriented programming is all about. So you describe something in a class that has stuff, we call those properties, and does stuff, we call those methods. It's that simple. When we use one of those cars in code, we give it a name. Buick, Chevy, VW, whatever. So look at this code right here.
VW.
I'm going to create an audio player called temp player. Okay, so this is the class. It comes from the AV kit. AV kit audio player is the auto. And this is what I called it, temp player. So my temp player is how I refer to it now. Does that make sense? So if this had a steering wheel that was maybe, or if it had wheels, the class might expect like me to tell it how many wheels it had. So it would be temp player dot wheels equals 4. So I'm telling it, the parent class, because I knew that it asked me how many wheels does a car expect. But the takeaway from this is you create an object by telling in Objective-C, by telling the computer what kind of thing you want to make, and then giving it a name. So you decide the name. The computer or the programmer who made the class decides the type of class it is. So the last question about this, and then we'll move on again. This is just the syntax. So in any object-oriented programming language, it's going to be the same case. What kind of thing do you want to make? What do you want to call it? And then what's the syntax to create it? So in Java, it would be temp player, AV audio player equals new, right? It's different syntax, but it's the same thing. In iOS, we tell it to allocate some memory and then initialize itself. So init. So allocate memory, initialize yourself. That's the slang, the normal talk for how Objective-C is working. You do all that at once with the new word in Java. But anyway, last question about this. Anybody want to tell me what the asterisk is? What is the asterisk in this line of code right here? Asterisk. Nobody know?
Casey?
Isn't it? I would have thought it's just to say this is its name. This is the object name.
Okay. So
This is the object.
what if we went? Just do that. So there's our temp player. I'm gonna get rid of that. What if we said? What if I made an integer? See the? Oops. I've got to name my integer. This is a warning and not an error, just telling me I'm not using it. But the point is, I'm not using a star on that one. I'm not using a star.
Ah,
on
I
that
know,
one.
because an asterisk is because it's an object, and the other one is because it's.
It's doing something.
No, it's
Close.
it's basically something native like a bool operator or an integer number.
Simple numbers,
Yeah, yeah.
Booleans. Okay, so the star tells Objective-C, really our compiler, that this thing that we're working with is part of Objective-C, or part of iOS and Objective-C only. You're not going to find an NS URL in any other case in any other programming world. So it's a built-in Objective-C thing. But we find integers, which is what the INT is, in all kinds of programming languages. Right? So this is called an object in Objective-C, and we got to tell the compiler that with a star. But this variable here, which I meant to call menu int or num int or whatever, just typoed there, is called a native type. So native types don't take stars. There's only a few of them: numbers, true, false, right? Doubles, floats, simple simple things like that. But everything else is an object. And I wanted to throw that up there because all throughout your code, you'll see plugin developers and programmers making objects. And I don't want you to be freaked out by this long line of code that appears all over the place. Our compiler turns the object type into a color for you. Right? And so that's all we're doing over and over and over again, is making instances of objects, is the technical term. So we have a for loop here. And for in iOS basically means do this a bunch of times, right? Up to a certain number of times. So we're going to say do this from 0 to the number of sound effect file names we have, right? Do that loop. If you have, who didn't want to type sound names? You. So we're going to create a new audio player for every sound effect in our project. So every sound effect has its own little player, so that as soon as you want to play it, it can play. It doesn't have to get rid of the sound and reload a new sound and then play again, because you'd have a delay. Which is why we don't want to have 100 sound effects on our project, because that means we would have 100 sound effect players, which take up a lot of memory, right? Yeah. So we're just creating objects over and over and over again. And all of these projects, everything is an object. Everything. There's no non-objects in object-oriented programming. So the last thing here is, this is how you do things in code. Well, I won't bring it up on the screen because we'll run out of time. You'll all understand what I'm saying. When we use Interface Builder, imagine me doing a little UI and dragging buttons out right from the little panel like over here. If I'm dragging this button somewhere, I don't have anything to drag it on, but this is an NS button. This is another NS button. Another. I'm not in the iOS kit. I'm in the regular Objective-C kit. But the point is, this tells you the kind of thing you have. When you drag it out onto your little canvas when you're using Interface Builder, it's doing the code little section for you. It's not magic. All it's doing is writing this for you. The trick is, and the part that everybody gets confused on, is for whatever reason, Apple and all of their wisdom decided that they wouldn't show you that code that was written for you when you drug it out onto this. It makes no sense to me, because I would say, hey, if you're going to give me a UI to drag buttons around, great, let me look at the code that is a result of my dragging buttons around. But they choose not to let us see that, which is very strange, because in most integrated development environments, think of like an HTML layout engine kind of tool that you use, right? You drag things around in like design mode, and then at any time you can see the code. It just seems odd, and I believe like fundamentally that's why people take so long to understand how to use the technology that they've given us. It's like, why don't they just show us the code that is a result of my using their little palette to drag out little spinners and pickers, and
I bet
they
you-
just don't. There's 4 technologies that are in play to make this web page work. Okay? I mean, 4 is a generalized term. So we've shifted from our projects, which I could have had that exact same conversation if it was an Android project, it's the same thing. Object-oriented in our projects, to this whole control panel thing. And how does your control panel work? I think it's equally as important for you to understand how your control panel works, or you could just slang say how my back end works. You know, it's just as important to know that as it is to know how your front end works, the phone, which we call front end and back end. So this is just a web page. This is just a web page. It's nothing more complicated than a web page. So anybody want to take a stab at if I said in a test, what's a web page? Who could answer that or try to answer that? What is a web page?
Page on the internet. A page that somebody's built and then published on the internet.
Okay. Anybody else?
Mathematical description of a visual representation.
Wow. Mathematical description of a visual representation page on the internet. Anybody else? There's probably a lot of descriptions. I don't know what Wikipedia would tell you. Those are all accurate. I would say it's an HTML document. Because that's all a browser knows is HTML. There's a common misconception that browsers are smart. They're not very smart. But fundamentally, if you view the source of any web page, you are going to see HTML. This is what your server delivers to your browser. Your browser does what Rowan said and translates this HTML into something that we think is pretty or useful or whatever. It's just HTML. That's all it is. So there's one of these 4 things that are working together. You have a web page. The other thing that you have, and where is this web page in this case? Where is that document I just showed you? Like, where does it live? Physically, where is that thing? Is it on my computer?
No, it's not.
It's on a server here, right? So it's parked somewhere. And when I type in this address, type, and I hit enter, another dumb question, what happens?
He loads the file.
You load the file. No, explode that a little bit. Anybody?
It loads the file that's on the server.
It goes to that address, has a little look around, takes all the stuff it needs, builds it, and shows it on the internet.
You're all right.
It downloads it. It downloads it into the cache.
Okay, so everybody's right. I'd like to say it makes a request. It asks for a page somewhere. Right? It asks, hey web server at this address, I want this file. So that's an HTTP request technically, right? So we have a web page that lives somewhere else, and we have a request. So anybody know what handles the request? What kind of software answers the question? The browser says, can I have this web page? Apache. So that's on your server, right? And people freak out. So Apache's a web server that just sits there and answers questions. You guys have heard me about the butler analogy?
Yeah.
Apache's just a butler standing at the door, and somebody knocks and can I help you? Yeah, I need that address. Okay, hang on. Goes and gets the page and hands it to him. He's not very smart. Apache is not smart at all. But he's really smart in that he knows where everything is. Oh, you want that page? No problem. Here you go. He can't make a new page. He can't change this page. He just knows how to get it and give it back. That's all he does. He's fast at that. Really fast at that. PHP. What is PHP? So we have a document, we have a web browser, Apache, and we have PHP, which is also where? On our server, right? Running on our server. It's software running on our server. Anybody want to take a stab at trying to describe what it does?
It's a language.
A language, okay. We can program in it, so it's a programming language, true. Anybody else? I call it middleware. I'll tell you why. Okay, I call it software or middleware that we can program rules into. So the butler's not smart. You ask me for this, you ask the butler for a web page. He stands there, he says, oh, you want my document.html? Let me go get it. Hands it back. That's all he does, back and forth. He can't change it. What if you come to the door, knock on the door and say, I want my document.html, but I want 3 things in the list instead of 4. I want different HTML than you gave me last time. I want a different document.
And he goes like,
He goes,
The light bulb's out.
I don't know. All I can give you is this document. It's the same every time. I don't know what you mean. PHP does. So if you have a PHP file extension at the end of your document file name, you're telling the butler to not answer the question, take the request, hand it to the PHP guy, who runs off and does something magical with it and brings it back to the butler.
I love
The butler hands it back. It's always the butler answering the question. Hey, PHP guy, give me that document. You got it yet? Right. So he might have to wait for a little bit. Sorry, dude, I'm almost with you. You done yet? Oh, here you go. It's always the butler who answers the questions. It's never PHP. PHP talks to butler. Butler talks to your browser. So the butler's Apache. PHP's this middleware, and we call it middleware because normally PHP runs off and has to go talk to the database guy. It says, hey database, I need to make a web page with 4 things in it. Last time I made a web page with 3 things in it, but the guy wants another version with 4 things in it. Database guy's like, geez Louise, database guy runs off and figures out what he needs, gives it to PHP, the data, right? So the 4th thing is MySQL. So MySQL saves all this structured data. PHP communicates with MySQL. Apache doesn't, right? MySQL only talks to PHP. PHP only talks to Apache, and Apache only talks to your browser. So that concept is hard for lots and lots of people to get their head around, but it's absolutely fundamental to how the whole entire internet works. That's how it works on Amazon.com. That's how it works on Netflix. That's how it works on Facebook. That's how it works on BuzzTouch. That's how it works on Google. That's how it works. Now, sometimes it's not PHP. It might be another little middleware guy. Sometimes it's not MySQL. It might be another database layer guy. But fundamentally, it's always that chain of events that happens. So when your phone and your app says, go get, I hit refresh, there seems to be a disconnection between like what's happening. It's a browser. It's exactly the same thing. It's making a request, boom, for a file at an address and waiting for the response. So your Apache web server says, oh, you want a btconfig.txt. I know where that is. Let me go get it. Here it is, fast. Oh, wait a minute. I'm asking for a btconfig.php, blah, blah, blah. Ah, Butler says, go get PHP guy. He needs to make me this first, right? Exactly the same thing. So if you think of your app as a browser, and somebody making HTTP requests is the technical term for, say, go get me this file at this address, I think it'll help you understand in an easier way, like why is my wheel spinning? I don't know, who's slow? Butler? Right? PHP? Somebody freaking slow. I need to find that guy and fire him. What the heck? Or maybe these guys aren't slow and it's just the internet because you're trying to return this big heavy file. And it just takes a long time to shove this suitcase through this little wire instead of a little envelope. Right? When there's problems that you're having, I think that it's not beyond your capability, if you're interested, to figure it out. This is in the world of computer programming and software and engineering and all that stuff, this is pretty simple stuff. You've got 25-year-old technologies that are well established, that the rules don't change. It's a web request at an address, and a response, which is the answer. That's all that's happening. So once again, not magic. I want you guys, the super fans of making apps, to not think of this as magic, and to think of it as a good way to do something. So this is a web app that we give to you, and we call it self-hosted, that you can park on a web server that has all the complicated stuff kind of figured out for you, but it still needs Apache, and it depends on your server running PHP, MySQL, but most servers do, right? You start an account, you upload these files, and you ask for them. You ask for them with an address. And if something's not right, then hopefully you'll get an error or whatever, but you shouldn't be like, you should think, oh, wait a minute, it's just a butler and a middleware guy and a database guy. So I wanted to touch on those two things because I really do genuinely think that this is not that complicated. And I recognize that people get overwhelmed and confused, and it can be like, whoa, but it doesn't have to be. So
No,
That's always
I
gonna say.
understand the concept, but
Yeah.
it-
Doesn't mean you have to go all hardcore
No,
and figure it all out, you know.
but if it's but if it was slow, I can just pick up the phone
It
and go,
does-
"Hey, PHP, is this me? Or is it a patch? You can put patch in the
You're
phone."
totally
No.
right, but you should be
I
like-
have no idea who it is. It's one of them.
Yeah, but you might then think to say, wait a minute, how do I know if I got the answer back? You might then look at the console on your project a little differently, right? Knowing what's happening.
No,
you might
yeah,
be like,
yeah.
it doesn't look like I'm even getting any answer back. So maybe it is the network, or maybe it is my Wi-Fi, or maybe my butler's taking a break. Who do I pay to keep my, right? Go HostGator guy. Why is Butler on a break? Right, you know, you could get pretty far by answering that. You know, we want to have an event once a year that the company puts on. And the first time we did this, we called it, BuzzCon 2013. And then we had this badge that represented like you went, and it's kind of cool. You see that in the forum, and it's kind of neat. But without a doubt, this is absolutely just as fun and just as helpful and just as useful as that could have been. So why not make a badge for this too? So we'll make a badge. It's, it won't like trump a BuzzCon 2014 or whatever, but I think it makes sense that
Some people came a lot farther than BuzzCon.
I traveled my ass off. Exactly. So totally. And so there's some technical reasons why it's hard. We can't just throw a badge in like 9 pro. There's a lot that goes on in
We're gonna
creating
turn
that every time the
military
webpage.
guys, full of badges,
Stripes.
Yeah, stripes,
Miguel,
Miguel, David, and Susan, now you're gonna have the BuzzCon and the BuzzDay.
No, when I tap forum, seriously, think about this. When I tap this button right here, what am I doing? Right here. What am I doing?
You're
In English.
Your
Would you-
request.
Perfect. So who am I asking?
You're asking Apache.
We're asking the butler for a web page. Hey Butler, give me a web page. So how does Butler know if this guy right here gets a BuzzDay badge?
Yes, PHP.
He doesn't know. It's different than the last time I asked because it's a different
Right.
address.
Just add another column in the database.
So Butler
come on.
guy's got to know. So there's the point that I'm trying to make is I got to teach the middleware guy like who does and who doesn't get these little purple cool little badges, and that's not a moment thing, right? I mean, I got to take the Butler and his buddy to the pub and buy him a beer and like teach them how this works, and then they'll start delivering badges that are BuzzDay purpley on the right posts or whatever. So I'll probably need a few days to do that. So don't freak out when where's my badge? But we'll get those in there, and I think that will be very, very, very cool. And from my perspective, sincerely, I wish we could give you more, right? I wish we could bring a box of T-shirts and a box of stuff. We just don't have that kind of loot laying around now. Maybe we will, thanks to gatherings like this. Maybe we won't, but that's the best we can do. At any rate, let's give Thomas another round of applause.
That looks too much like BuzzTouch.
Yeah.
Like Buzz Touchers. Oh, it's sad. I think I'll move video.
On fire, 24, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. This shit is people. Did you make one? 28. That's a bill on an icon or a billboard. 29. That's on the homepage of icons.com. It is, yeah. It's embarrassing when people, I want to see contest. It's like, really, dude? You freaking stole that. 31.
Yeah, these are actually we went on half an hour trying to find the font alone. And then,
That's Buzz Lightyear meets Icon Thief.
that's just the same thing.
Obviously the same. 35, 36. That's how
There's 57.
And your connotation when you saw that was an existing.
I thought that looked like Domino's pizza.
I thought it was like a pizza.
Ah, yes, that is what it is. That looks more like
Domino's pizza.
Box for Jaunty
If you're a free member now, for whatever reason, I'm not going to mail you a check every year. It's going to be free.